if you've been listening to this show, you know that a lot of challenging personalities are being nominated to lead the United States government. But the question always comes up, well, what can we do about it? So we're going to talk about those nominees and a little bit, I think, about what you can do about it now with our next guest, Josh Nelson. Josh is the Deputy Political Director at Credo Mobile, and he joins us now. Josh, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me on, Richard.
So as we, as I said in the intro, we've been all over this thing, as you can imagine, these appointees. What's your initial impression of, the nominees for sure, although I can guess, I think I have an idea what your answer is going to be on that, but also of the nomination process itself. Let's start there. What do you think of the nominees and the process so far?
Yeah, so far, all of Trump's nominees have been bad. There's not a single nominee for a single position that Credo supports. So we've decided to focus on 7 of the nominees that we think are just the absolute worst. We're calling these folks the Swampy 7, and that's in honor of Trump's lie during the campaign that he repeated over and over again, saying that he was going to drain the swamp. Senator Warren, you may have heard pointed out recently that these folks are actually just swamp monsters that he's trying to put in charge of federal agencies. So Credo is focused on again, these Swampy 7. So that's Jeff Sessions, the man who in the 1980s was deemed too racist to be a federal judge and has now been nominated to be Attorney General. Rex Tillerson, the Exxon CEO and friend of Putin, who's been nominated to be Secretary of State. Betsy DeVos, the billionaire bigot who hates public education, who's been nominated to be Secretary of Education. Tom Price, the Medicare killer who actually denies the link between HIV and AIDS, has been nominated to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. Andrew Puzder, the sexist, anti-worker extremist, nominated to be Secretary of Labor. Steve Mnuchin, the Goldman Sachs foreclosure king, nominated to be Treasury Secretary. And Scott Pruitt, the climate change denier, who's nominated to actually run the EPA. So Credo right now is calling on senators to stand up against Trump and these Swampy 7 by opposing their confirmation and doing everything in their power to keep these cronies and clowns out of our government.
First of all, I want to jump in for a second, Josh, and say I love those thumbnail descriptions. You may have a future in my line of work if you ever want it. But secondly, I also wanted to say, the notion that Trump, were any of his appointments good, I was almost willing, based on what a couple veteran friends told me, I was almost willing to give a pass to General Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, until whose troops seemed to like him, until I saw that he was on the board of General Dynamics, which does a nearly $15 billion a year worth of business with the very Defense Department that General Mattis has been tapped to run. So I would tend to agree with you. There are no good ones. So you guys have identified this Swampy 7, and I agree with you. They're the worst of the worst. Steve Mnuchin, by the way, to me, when you look at the fact that he's foreclosed on widows and so on, he literally seems like the villain in a silent movie Western. That's how bad he is. So where do we go? Knowing that these people are dreadful and that the 7 you've named are especially dreadful, where do we take that information?
So it's a tough situation. So as you know, most Republicans are likely to fall in line. They're not likely to go against their party. They're not likely to stand up to Trump. Most of them don't have the courage or integrity to do that. Unfortunately, there aren't enough Democrats in the Senate to block these folks due to the filibuster reform from a few years ago. So we've got a tough challenge here. So we both need to keep all of the Democrats in firm opposition to these nominees, and we need to peel off a few Republicans for each one. So Credo has got petitions targeting each of the Swampy 7, and we're doing call campaigns on most of them. We've already put in nearly 1 million petition signatures, and we've put in tens of thousands of phone calls to Senate offices. Right now, we're doing thousands of phone calls every single day. Folks are certainly encouraged to join us and take action against these nominees at credoaction.com. To Senate Democrats, we're just trying to make it clear that if they vote for any of these nominees and vote to confirm them, they're going to hold some of the responsibility for the inevitable abuses and failures of the Trump administration. I don't think that's something that most Senate Democrats want on their conscience or on their record for the rest of their career.
Yeah, there are two things sort of implicit in what you were just saying, and we're talking with Josh Nelson, who's the deputy political director at Credo Mobile, and I want to just bring them both out for a second, Josh. One is the idea of the potential for success in blocking one or more of these nominations. And the second one, which I want to talk about first, is the notion of when you lose right. Meaning that, and let's talk about that for a second, meaning you talked about wanting to make sure that the Democrats hold together and are on record as opposing these nominations. To me, this is something that Democrats need to do more often, which is even when they're not going to win a fight, put up the good fight so that people know where you and your party stand on the issues that matter to them and on the people that are going to, in this case, inevitably hurt the American voters and the American people on down the road. Is that, do you agree with that statement? And is that a part of your strategy?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, there are sort of two options. You can win, or you can lose but fight anyway. Those are really the only two legit options as we see it. So we want Democrats to fight. We want them to shine a spotlight on just how outrageous and unqualified and radical Trump's nominees are. And then, specifically, even without a majority in the Senate, and even without the ability to block these nominees on their own, Democrats do have some power here, right? So they can gum up the works. They can slow things down. Again, they can shine that spotlight on how extreme and unqualified these folks are. They can run out the clock and force the confirmation process to take as long as possible. And by doing that, keep these nominees' outrageous records, past statements, histories in the news cycle, and sort of damage Trump's brand in the process.
I think that's so important, Josh, because I think that in the years to come, people are going to remember the harm that's being done to them, and they're going to remember how difficult the situation is for them. And if the Democrats fight, they're going to remember that they were warned that this was going to happen. But if the Democrats don't fight, people are not going to look back 2 years from now when the congressional elections come up, or 4 years from now when Trump is up for re-election. They're not going to look back and say, well, at least they were nice to Mitch McConnell. Right? So I think that's part of it. And when we talk about the harm that these nominees can do, I want your thoughts on this, but it seems to me Tom Price for Health and Human Services wants to destroy Medicare, hates Medicare. We have an administration which, along with their colleagues on Capitol Hill, is likely to gut Social Security. I mean, do you agree with me on that these guys are going to go after the two most popular programs possibly in government history, Social Security and Medicare?
It seems very likely. We know that, as you said, Tom Price has it for a long time, has wanted to destroy Medicare. It's been one of his top priorities in the Congress. The Republican leader in the House, Paul Ryan, it's, again, one of his top priorities as well. So I think it's very likely that that's where they're going. There's sort of an interesting contradiction or struggle playing out there where, Trump said on the campaign trail that he wasn't going to go after Medicare. Obviously, he said lots of things that turned out not to be true. Reince Priebus is still saying that Trump's not going to be going after Medicare. If that's the case, it certainly did not make any sense for him to nominate somebody like Tom Price, who, as you said, hates Medicare, to lead Health and Human Services. So I think it's extremely likely that they are going to try to destroy Medicare, destroy Social Security, and basically wage war on American seniors. If and when they do that, they're going to have a huge fight on their hands. The progressive movement is unified to defend Medicare and Social Security. And I think a lot of people realize that, if you go after these programs that tens of millions of Americans rely on and senior citizens rely on primarily, there's going to be a massive, massive backlash, both in terms of protests and at the ballot box in the next election.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And now, so we've talked about the strategy for resisting. We've talked about the strategy for making it clear you oppose these guys, even if their nominations eventually succeed. Let's talk about winning for a second. Josh, do you think there's any possibility that Democrats and progressive activists can unite and actually block one or more of these nominations, or is that too much to hope for?
It is certainly an uphill climb, and that's due to the tendency of Republicans to sort of vote in lockstep, and the fact that they're all afraid to stand up to Trump, and again to the filibuster reform. So up until a few years ago, it would have required 60 votes to confirm some of these folks, and we certainly could have blocked some of them. Now it only requires 50, and so Republicans have, I think, 52 votes. So we do need to peel off a few Republicans. This week, Rex Tillerson, nominee for Secretary of State, had his confirmation hearing. There is some opposition there. There's video footage out there of Tillerson toasting champagne with Vladimir Putin, which makes some folks like Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, and Senator Marco Rubio a bit uncomfortable. Obviously, these are folks that some of them are folks that Trump went after pretty aggressively during the campaign. So there's some tension there as well. I think Tillerson may be our best chance to take one of these nominees down, but that's just going to depend on whether or not Republican senators, and we only need a handful if we can hold the Democrats, are willing to actually go against Trump and go against their party to do what's right for the American people. At this point, it remains to be seen whether they're going to do that or whether they're just sort of grandstanding in the hearings.
And we also have to make sure that when we peel off Republican opposition, that it's based on the right messaging and the right argument in favor of more progressive policies wherever possible. That may not be possible, I guess, but I'm thinking of some of the moderates like Collins and so on, some of the more moderate senators, whether they might ever, maybe they won't, I don't know, but whether they might ever say enough is enough. This is too bad. We can't have a predator like Steve Mnuchin running the United States economy, but I guess that's too much to ask for, huh?
It may be. I mean, you would hope that some of those folks that, Susan Collins, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, they all, at least at one time, have said they believe in climate change. So you would hope that, a senator who acknowledges that climate change is real and has done so over the years, would be opposed to an EPA administrator who denies that climate change is real and who has spent his entire career doing the bidding of big oil companies and fracking companies.
And that would, of course, take courage on their part. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's going to be extremely interesting. That's for sure. So you guys, you mentioned that at Credo Mobile, you're delivering signatures and emails and so on. So what are your plans? They're cramming these confirmation hearings through. They're in some cases not doing the necessary paperwork and so on. What's your plan for the next few days and going forward, and where can people find out more about it?
So we are ramping up the call campaigns right now, just putting in thousands and thousands of phone calls every day to Senate offices in D.C., and we're starting to make calls to local Senate offices around the country. We're going to increase that as much as possible. Right now, obviously, we've got sort of confirmation hearings, then we've got committee votes, and then we'll have votes on the floor of the U.S. Senate. So there are a couple sort of opportunities for activism here where phone calls to Congress are really one of the best things that folks can do. We're also organizing local petition deliveries where we can. People are certainly encouraged to join us and get involved in that, and you can do so at credoaction.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for all your good work in that area. We really appreciate it. And this is really going to be, this fight, in my opinion, is going to shape the struggle for the next 4 years. So I'm glad you guys are on it. I'm glad you came on the show to talk about it. Josh Nelson, Deputy Political Director at Credo Mobile. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Richard.